African Origins of the Major Western Religions by Yosef A. Ben Jochannon. Copyright 1970. Dedicated to the innocently recent born and those yet to be born African and African American infants who must one day take their place in mankind's world as the inheritors of the religions their forebears created, hoping that they may become the forces of change to bring this world to its equilibrium once more. All faith is false. All faith is true. Truth is the shattered mirrors strewn in myriad bits, while each believes his little bit, the whole to own. From the Qazadah of Hajj Abu el-Yazidi, as translated by Sir Richard F. Burton. Preface. Every time I had the good fortune to research into someone's religion, I found God to be the image of the people to whom the religion belongs. That is, providing its philosophical concepts are indigenous, not colonial. The colonialism referred to is not essentially one of the conqueror, nor is it one of the conquered in the sense of troops and land, but of slaves and masters. In this case, slaves who have seen the shackles which bound their bodies removed for over 100 years, but not those of their mind. Because of their mental enslavement to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the Africans and African Americans who have for one reason or another been forced to abandon their own indigenous religions need to know their role in either of these three. As a person of African origin, I feel that it is my obligation to enter this field, where so many non-Africans have before me entered to speak and write about me. In so doing, I shall show that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are as much African as they are Asian in origin, and in no sense whatsoever European as the title, Western religions, suggests, that the terms Semitic and Hamitic, as they are presently applied to the early founders of these religions, are racist in character and intent. The sole purpose is to deny the existence of that which most Europeans and European Americans call Negro, Africans south of the Sahara, and Bantu, among other such nomenclatures of contempt in the development of religion and thought in ancient North Africa, particularly Sais, or Egypt. But the fact still remains with respect to the origin of religion, that there would have been no Egyptian civilization, high culture, had the Africans, the so-called Negroes of the upper Nile Valley in Central Africa, not migrated north along the more than 4,100 miles long Nile River into Sais. Equally, there could be no Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, the daughter, granddaughter, and great-granddaughter of the African god Ra and the mysteries, all three being outgrowths of the Egyptian religion, as shown in the coffin and pyramid text in the Book of the Dead and Osiris. The revelations in this work show that the Reverend Martin Luther's revolt against papal Roman Christianity, as well as Judaism and Islam, remained stagnantly rhetoric until the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., no relationship to the above, introduced it into the element of nonviolence he copied from the Hindu teacher, philosopher, lawyer, and statesman Mahatma Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. And even though Dr. King tried to invoke the ancestral worship method of calling upon the spirit world in Christianity saints, like his God, Jesus Christ, he was not to be heard by an irreligious nation of people whose gods appeared to be machines of mass production. The traditional religions of the indigenous African peoples and their descendants, which are notoriously called paganism and fetishism by antagonists of the so-called Western religions, are in fact the forerunners of Nile Valley religions. Therefore, they are the creators of the mysteries of Sais, Egypt, Cush, Ethiopia, and Nubia, Sudan. This is shown in the text of this volume, along with the fact that the mysteries were developed from the ancient religious rites of the indigenous Africans who once occupied the lands around the major Great Lakes of Central Africa and along the headwaters of the Nile River. That civilization in Al-Kibulan, Africa, traveled from south to north with the flow of the Nile River and all its component parts. With them, they brought religion and philosophy, all at which existed before the first nation in Europe, Greece, came into being. The similarity between existing religious practices and parts of West, Central, East, and South Africa with that of the ancient indigenous Africans of Sais, Egypt, is not coincidental, but instead is common to the heritage which began along the Great Lakes of Central Africa and the headwaters of the Nile River, as shown in this work. There are people today around the world who have suffered similarly from European and European American imperialism, aided and abetted by the leaders of Judaism and Christianity, who also actively engaged in slavery by sanctioning its institution through twisted quotations from their own versions of that which is called the Holy and Sacred Scriptures. Therefore, information of the nature found in this work may be considered of current importance, but there was never a period in the history of mankind when they were of no importance. It is shown that most Europeans and European Americans have consistently used the same information revealed in this work, disguised as what they choose to call Greek philosophy and Western religions, titles of direct Caucasian-oriented ethnic superiority. The mere titles themselves suggest the exclusiveness of European and European American peoples only. It is recognized, however, that this may not be sufficient reason to speak out against this type of academic dishonesty, according to those who wish not to rock the boat of the established order of things, although knowing that truth is not being served. But the main purpose of this work is to show that there is another phase to the greatness that is still Mother Africa, the mother of mankind, a sort of Garden of Eden. Also to provide another perspective in Africa's major contribution to world civilization, which may well assist in rearranging the present and future tenets of religious thought. Introduction. No positive religion that has moved man has been able to start with a tabula rasa and express itself as if religion were beginning for the first time, in form if not in substance. The new system must be in contact all along the line with the older ideas and practices which it finds in possession. A new scheme of faith can find a hearing only by appealing to religious instincts and susceptibilities that already exist, and it cannot reach these without taking account of the traditional forms in which all religious feeling is embodied, and without speaking a language which men accustomed to these old forms can understand. The above is the manner in which Robertson Smith began his classic study entitled Religion of the Semites. But Mr. Smith's words could be extended to include that no major religion of today is exclusive of moral and philosophic concepts of any of the peoples with whom it had contact in its earliest development. This would, of course, give credit to those African and Asian predecessors who were the ones that really began the religions which are today called Judaism or Hebrewism, Christianity, and Islam, formerly Mohammedanism. If what has been said so far could become common knowledge, the general public would have no difficulty in recognizing that much of what they read in their Torah, Jewish Holy Book, or 5 Books of Moses, Christian Holy Bible, any version, Roman Catholic or Protestant, and Christian Scientist, and Muslim, Quran or Quran, would be conceded to be of African origin as well as Asian, and adopted later by Europeans and European Americans before they arrived in the Americas, the quote-unquote New World. But as long as racism remains the basis upon which these religions are taught, rejection of the indigenous African and Asian peoples' contribution to them shall continue to be camouflaged into the authorship of those who did least to start them, but most to continue them as their own exclusive domain. To say at this time that Moses of the Hebrew or Jewish religion and peoples was an indigenous African, black or Negro, would create a catastrophic consternation among theological racists and bring down all sorts of anti-Semitic charges by the same people who equally as strenuously would admit that Moses was born in Egypt. At the same instance, forgetting that Egypt is in Africa. Why? Because Egypt, in most European American minds, is some sort of a mythical place, remote from any place near Africa. This would not stop them from saying that, quote, Moses was found floating down the Nile River in a bulrush basket, conveniently forgetting that the Nile River's source begins in Uganda. Also that there are two Niles, the white and the blue, and that the White Nile is more than 4,000 miles long, flowing northwards through Sudan and Egypt, and finally emptying into the Mediterranean Sea. They seem to forget that the Blue Nile's main source of water comes from the Ethiopian highlands at Lake Tanai, and that the other source of the Nile, the Athera River, also starts in the Ethiopian highlands and flows into Sudan, where it joins both the Blue and White Niles. The Ten Commandments, spoken of in each of the so-called Western religions, moral code of ethics, are based upon extensions of philosophical developments by the indigenous Africans, the so-called Negroes and Bantus of the Nile Valley civilizations from pre-recorded history. The laws that say, thou shalt not kill, etc., and thou shalt not steal, etc., were used in Egypt, Sais, and Ethiopia, Cush, thousands of years before the birth of Moses of the Hebrew Jewish Torah. Yet these two laws, including all of the other 10 that make up the so-called Western religion's basic moral codes, are still being taught as if the first time they ever came to the knowledge of mankind was when they were allegedly given to Moses on Mount Sinai. At least this is the manner in which they are presently taught in Europe, the Americas, and wherever European and European American religious and economic controls are in evidence. It will be shown that the statements so far may hold true with regard to the almost successful attempts to make all philosophical concepts in the major religions cited as beginning with the usually mentioned Greek philosophy and Greek philosophers. In this sense, the Greeks are treated as if they were in no way whatsoever influenced or taught by the Egyptians, Ethiopians, and other indigenous Africans along the Nile Valley, whence the philosophical concepts now called Greek philosophy were originated, thousands of years before the creation of the Greek nation. In this regard, Professor George G. M. James, in his book entitled Stolen Legacy, states on the title page, quote, the Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North Africa, commonly called the Egyptians. Strange as it may seem, the ancient Egyptians were being called Caucasian by most European and European American educators, purposely ignoring Herodotus' description of them in his book, The Histories, Book 2. Count Constantine Francois de Volney, who personally visited Egypt in 1789 CE from his native France, wrote in his book, Ruins of Empires, published in 1802, the following: The earth, under these holy lands, produces only thorns and briars. Man soweth in anguish, and reapeth tears and cares. War, famine, pestilence assail him by turns, and yet are not these the children of the prophets? The Mussulman, Christian, Jew, are they not the elect children of God, loaded with favors and miracles? Why then do these privileged races no longer enjoy the same advantages? Why are these fields, sanctified by the blood of martyrs, deprived of the ancient fertility? Why have those blessings been vanished since, and transferred for so many ages to other nations in different climates? Count Volney's questions could be asked of the Africans who are today being called Negroes, Bantus, Hottentots, Bushmen, Pygmies, and a host of other degrading titles, whose ancestors were responsible for the development of the religions mentioned herein, starting with the worship of the sun god, Ra, then passing on to the gods Jehovah, Jesus Christ, and Allah. The first question must be, how much longer are we to remain outside of the religions we originated in our mysteries in Egypt and other high cultures along the Nile? The answer in this case would be simple. At least the peoples of Africa can still point to such religious works as recorded in the Book of the Dead, translated from its original hieroglyph by Sir E. A. Wallace Budge, Facing Mount Kenya by Jomo Kenyatta, the edited works in John's Muntu. Of course, there are countless others that show the variety of depth in the philosophical concepts of African traditional religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, presently being analyzed. In the Book of the Dead, the origin of heaven and hell are clearly seen to be nothing more than places, poor ones at that, of the indigenous Africans of Egypt's netherworld and mysteries developed along the Nile Valley, all of which stemmed from civilizations that preceded the birth of the first Harable, Hebrew of Jew, Abraham, Avram or Abram, centuries before the creation of the first Hebrew nation, Palestine. Therefore, in this work, the god Ra is shown to be the quote-unquote jealous god, who wants, quote, no other gods before me, etc. This the Hebrews copied in Egypt and changed in the following manner: Thou shalt have no gods before me, saith Yahweh. In the case of Reverend Placide Temple's book, Bantu Philosophy, this Roman Catholic priest failed miserably to dispel the confusion in his own mind to prove that there are basic philosophical concepts in traditional African religions on an equal level of spiritual consciousness to Judaism, Christianity, or Islam. Yet he continued to show how much better Christianity, his own religion, is than any other so-called Bantu religions and Bantu thoughts he examined. Jan, who claims no special religious affiliation or preference in his work, attempted to show many basic philosophical elements in a few traditional African religions which are comparable to the three religions called Western religions. In his book, Muntu, The New African Culture, pages 29 to 30, as translated by Marjorie Green, Grove Press Incorporated, New York, 1961, from its original work in German entitled Muntus, published by Eugene Diedrichs Rolag, Dusseldorf, Germany, 1958, Mr. Jan gives the following account on voodoo. 1. Old accounts of the cult. Voodoo, word of dark vowels and heavily rolling consonants. Voodoo, mysterious nocturnal sound of drums in the Haitian mountains of abominations they have read about. Voodoo, idolatry, sorcery. Voodoo, epitome of all impiety, all depravity and terror. Witches' Sabbath of the infernal powers in irredacible heresy. What is it all about? Some people have tried to derive the word from the dance of the golden calf, Voodoo, and it has also been related to the heretical side of the Valdesians, Vaudois, who were reputed to practice witchcraft. In fact, the whole practice of witchcraft in the Middle Ages was called voodooisle. The word is written in many different ways: Vadu, Vadu, Voodoo, etc. But it comes from Dahomey in West Africa, where it means genius, protective spirit. In the Fan language, it is Vuda, and in Uve, Voodoo. The name of the cult, like the cult itself, is of West African origin, for the Haitians, for the most part, come from there. The reason why it was the religious conceptions of Dahomey in particular that came to prevail in Haiti is apparent from a London report of 1789, which tells us that 10 to 12,000 slaves were exported yearly from the kingdom of Dahomey. The English exported only 7 to 800 of these, the Portuguese about 3,000, and the French the remainder. In other words, more than 6 to 8,000 a year, who were shipped to the French Antilles, above all the Saint Dominique, as the principal French colony of Haiti was then called. The earliest indication of the survival of African cults in Haiti we owe to an anonymous French report, which says, "The slaves are strictly forbidden to practice the dance, which in Suriname is called water mama, and in our colonies the ma de agua, water mother. They therefore make a great secret of it, and all we know is that it highly inflames their imaginations. They make immense efforts to do evil things. The leader of the plot falls into such transports that he loses consciousness." Moreau de Saint-Méry, an enlightened scholar, lawyer, and politician who was born in Martinique and practiced law for 9 years in Haiti before playing an important part in the French Revolution, employed the leisure hours of the North American exile forced on him through his quarrel with Robespierre in describing in detail the geographical, social, and political conditions in Haiti. In his works of several volumes, this relative of the Empress Josephine describes, among other things, a voodoo ceremony. According to the Arada Negroes, voodoo means a great supernatural being, a snake that knows the past and the present, and through the medium of the high priestess and of a negress foretells the future. These two are called king and queen, master and mistress, or papa and mama. The meeting takes place, he says, only secretly and at night, far from profane eyes. The initiated put on sandals and wrap themselves in red clothes. The king and queen wear girdles. A chest, through the boards of which one can see the snake, serves as an altar. The faithful present their wishes. Then the queen leaps upon the chest, falls at once into a trance, begins to prophesy, and gives her commands. Sacrificial gifts are brought. The king and queen receive them. The receipts are used to meet the expenses of the community and to assist needy members. Then follows an oath similar to that at the opening of the meeting and as fearful as the first, an oath of secrecy and obedience. Jan's details of a voodoo ceremony on pages 42 and 43 of his book show very clearly the common relationship between traditional concepts in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Voodooism, which most 20th century moderns do not know exists. He continues on. In the voodoo ceremony, the first Loa to be invoked is Legba. He is the lord of roads and streets, the Hermes of the voodoo Olympus, the protector of crossroads and doors, the protector of the herd. His wife, Ayazan, is the goddess of the markets and the highest goddess of the Arata Olympus. Legba's symbol, his veve, is the cross, a cross which has, however, only its form, not its meaning, in common with the Christian cross. The vertical board means the deep and the heights, the street of the lowest, the invisible ones. The foot of this vertical world axis is rooted in the waters of the deep. Here, on the island under the sea, is Guinea, Africa, the legendary home. Here the Loas have their permanent places from which they hasten straight upward to the living. Every vertical, above all every sti, and especially the Potio Matan in the hindfoot, symbolizes the tree of the gods, which unites the damp earth from which all things spring with heaven. The horizontal bar of the cross signifies the earthly and the human world. Only at the crossroad where the human and divine axis meet does contact with divinities take place, and this crossroad is guarded by Legba. In Dahomey and Nigeria, he is the interpreter of the gods, who translates the requests and prayers of men into their language. In Haiti, he has the function of opening the barriere that separates men from the Loas. He is invoked in the Van Valu rhythm and dance. The music and song of the dance are very similar in purpose to that of the so-called storefront churches of Harlem. Thus, the following from Jan's description above. Atibo Legba Louvre Laye Pumwe. Papa Legba Louvre Baya Pumwe. Louvre Baye Pu Macab Ratre. Atuban Legba Ouvra La Barre pour moi. Papa Legba Ouvre la barre pour moi. Ouvre la barre pour me faire capable d'entrer. There are many more stanzas to this song, however. The reason for not showing the entire song is due to the fact that the main purpose of noting it was not to learn the entire song, only to get an insight into the projection of man and his God as seen in the voodoo ceremonial dance and song. On the island of Cuba, not too far from Haiti, voodooism becomes maniquismo, a name which carries in the mind of most European Americans the synonymous meanings of black magic, Satanism, idolatry, heathen superstition, etc. Fernand Ortiz, one of the foremost writers on this subject known to European Americans, disclaimed any religious origin whatsoever for Maniquismo in his book La Africana de la Música Folcloria de Cuba, La Habana, 1950. Ortiz called it a secret society, a kind of Freemasonry to which only the initiate who has sworn his allegiance may belong. Ortiz, who is of Roman Catholic Christian origin, overlooked the fact that Christianity is still a secret society in many lands today, and that it too was once so labeled everywhere. It was and still is a religion to which only the initiates who have sworn their allegiance may belong. But Ortiz's position is typically what happens when an exponent of one or no religion pretends to write an unbiased analysis of another person's religion. If one is to take Ortiz's premise as the criteria for what is a religion and what is a secret society, then the baptism, christening, and confirmation rites of the Christian initiations must be omitted. Equally, circumcision of the Jews and Muslims also. the exclusion of women from direct worship with their men in Orthodox Judaism and Islam? Or are these not secret rites? Are they not special requirements in which only sworn members alone may rightfully indulge? The opinions and expressions already shown are but a mere sampling of how religious personalities see each other's religion. Not only how they see each other in religious roles, but how they also deny the existence of each other's God. Of course, the indigenous Africans, the so-called Negroes, niggers, etc., and their descendants are not even entitled to have the respect of being capable of creating a religion with common philosophical idealism, much less having a God which does not secure the endorsement of those European and European American judges who are in charge of the Department of Certification of Fitness and Qualification of Religions and Gods. Since there are no African or African Americans allowed on the board of God certifiers due to their inferior color and race, the traditional African religions must then remain secret societies, while the certifiers' religions, Judaism, Christianity, sometimes Islam, receive the good God and religious seal of approval. All others are damned to the pagan depth of inferiority, and only can they expect to see God if they abandon their pagan God and heathen religion for one of the approved religions, preferably Christianity. The Africans and their descendants, black people, everywhere need not defend their traditional religious philosophies and philosophies upon the approval of European and European American standards. Neither shall this work, even when they try to do so. Why? Because within the three most accepted religions in Europe and the Americas, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, often called Western religions, Africans have been the founders of said religions and their teachings along with the Asians hundreds of years, in some cases thousands of years before they were known to the peoples of Europe. The fact that within the last 300 to 400 years, the role of the indigenous Africans in these major religions has been carefully and purposely denied, suppressed, and in most cases omitted, will not stop the truth about their indigenous African origins from coming to the surface. In light of all that has been so far stated, further revelation of the general and specific role certain Africans had in the founding of all three religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is being retold, all in the objective of setting the record straight or revealing the truth. Hopefully, from this work, knowledge about some of the major indigenous African contributors and their descendants in the founding and development of Judaism, Christianity, and extension of Judaism and Islam, and extension of Judeo-Christianity would spread to those who do not know that the religion they practice and the God they worship are as much African, black, as they are Asian, yellow and brown, and or European, white, since Christianity, the European American version of it, is the major religion in the Americas, the Caribbeans included. It is the center of focus to which this work must mainly address itself. Moreover, because the vast majority of African peoples and their descendants, both in Western Hemisphere and Africa, are critically conditioned and or affected by it. Islam, the major contender with European and European American oriented Christianity for the minds of the African and African American people, will of necessity receive particular consideration with regards to its foundation, which is so intensely African, Ethiopian in particular, in structure. Judaism, which today has very little or no real influence on any large segment of the African peoples anywhere, due primarily to the inhuman pressures brought upon the indigenous Hebrews of Africa by Christian and Islamic missionaries in their conversion crusades, will nevertheless be carefully examined with regards to its previous control and influence on many indigenous African societies, equally for its indigenous African origins, will be highlighted. As the clamor for violent or nonviolent action challenges the moral fiber of this Anglo-Saxon Greek-centric oriented United States of America, many noted religious prophets within the major black communities asserted themselves as spiritual leaders, all of whom believed they had received some sort of a calling from a Caucasianized God. The most noted of these are listed in the order in which they appeared on the national or international scene. Thus, Father Peace Divine, Rabbi Wentworth Matthews, Prophet Sweet Daddy Grace, Prophet Elijah Muhammad, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To these must be added the name of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. He was not a minister of the gospel, yet it was he who brought a different dimension to African American Christianity which no other black man in this area of the world has ever attempted. The men above, all of African origin, have produced an immeasurable impact on that which is labeled today Judeo-Christian civilization and white power structure, government, names which are used synonymously with the United States of America. In the case of Father Divine, he gave Jesus Christ much more of a humanistic posture than any of his contemporaries. On the other hand, the prophet Elijah Muhammad, reportedly of a former Baptist preacher background, debunked European American style Christianity and Judaism as currently practiced. Not only has the prophet removed his followers from what he called, quote, the hypocrisy of the white devil's religion, etc., but he also modernized the Muslim Quran to suit the needs of the Asiatic black peoples, etc., according to the message given to the quote-unquote dead Negroes his followers desired to save. This is a basic tenet in the Nation of Islam, the correct name for the so-called black Muslims. The Honorable Marcus Garvey, late President General of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Incorporated, UNIA, started a new Christian philosophy and made Jesus Christ appear black for the people who worshipped him throughout the Harlems of the Western world. Garvey took his image from the Jesus Christ depicted in the Ethiopian Coptic Church, the oldest Christian church and nation in existence. This work's ultimate goal is to show the definite links between juju, voodoo, and other exclusively indigenous traditional African religions with Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, among other religions more commonly known to the European Americans, and of course to those of other ethnic groupings. It will also show that when Juju and Voodoo, as well as other traditionally African religions, meet the conversion efforts of either three so-called Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the latter three must accommodate the first two by adopting many aspects of the basic tenets in order to keep the new converts. For this reason, and many others not being mentioned here, it is virtually impossible to find an African convert in Africa who has surrendered all of his or her traditional culture and religious practices, especially customs associated with ancestral worship and oracles. For European-style Judaism and Christianity or Asian Islam. Because of the same reason, most African American forms of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam take on concepts and emotional outlets not common among their European American religious contemporaries of the three so-called Western religions. However, no attempt whatsoever will be made to prove whether Abraham, Moses, Jesus Christ, Mohammed, Bilal, or Oldemir, and any other gods and prophets were black, white, yellow, brown, red, or technicolor, except in cases where they already have been made to appear Caucasianized, and in fact are known to be African or of African origin. This work shall not attempt to convey any special political, cultural, economic, moral, or religious message, nor shall it refrain from any area heretofore considered to be controversial and anti-established by certain ethnic, religious, or political groupings. If this work were to receive the endorsement of everyone, then it is certain that it has said nothing meaningful by virtue of the subject matter alone. African origins of the major religions adopted by the Western world shall seek out and report truth as it is discovered in the pages of recorded history, also through personal knowledge and contact by the author. This is all it is intended to accomplish. Scholarly excellence is the goal this work attempts to achieve. Thus, it is written on a level somewhere between the college sophomore and the generally articulate reading public, which is the primary academic prerequisite for this course of study. For the reasons already stated, there are very few footnotes on the pages of the text. The major notes are given at the rear of the book in sections entitled Notes for Chapter Number 1, etc. This method of documentation affords the reader a free flow of the information without having to be immediately distracted by footnotes, of which the average reader may or may not be interested. By the same token, the necessary notes and documentations are still available to the much more inquiring student or general reader who may desire to become involved in further research, or just to verify the author's sources of information and references. At specific points in the work, however, it became necessary to insert in brackets certain documentary or related notes and evidence as part of the integral whole of the free-flowing information, all of which dealt with recorded events. Otherwise, the quality and uniqueness of this work would not have been maintained. Lastly, another major objective of this work is to make the past relate to the living present by means of the materials presented. The old, past, should be relevant to the contemporary present in order that the new, future, could be approached and subsequently obtained. If this be not the reason for works such as this, but instead only its historic, chronological findings, then this would have been a waste of good time and academic research. The role of the Africans, sometimes called Negroes, Bantus, Pygmies, Hottentots, Bushmen, Niggers, and a host of other such degrading terminologies, and their descendants in the field of religion, as in all other areas of human endeavor, is too often ignored, and in too many cases completely denied. Because of this existing condition, it is necessary, if for no other reason, to bring to the forefront once more a few of the African black personalities that preceded the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in trying to put religion into religious congregations and institutions. It is also necessary to show many of them as the people who were most responsible for the origination of the philosophical concepts by which European Americans and African Americans are guided as moral codes, all of which today is called Western religion and Western philosophy. The events of the death of Minister El Haj Malik Shabazz, Malcolm X, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. caused certain delay in the completion of this work, which was more than 3 years in preparation. Those who knew of this work in its earliest stages will notice that Chapter 5 has been revised to meet the above events, and by doing so, the entire manuscript has had to be rewritten in many places. This new dimension has enhanced the current value of the material content. However, it will be noted that none of the personalities mentioned in this work is rated over any of the others. If this were done, the purpose for which this work is created would have suffered beyond repair. In closing, and with respect to the major contributions of all of the Africans and people of African origin mentioned herein, the following African saying is given: An offspring without a spirit past is a being without an ancestral tie. Author unknown.